So let me call the meeting to order. This is the July 25th meeting of the 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force. I'm the chair of the task force, Paul Bohm, and I'm calling the meeting to order. Let me start by calling the roll. David Ropeek.
Here.
Rich Feely. Got to unmute.
Rich is here, though muted.
Rich is there.
Okay, I'm here.
Got it. Kurt Herman.
I'm here.
Carrie Flood.
I am here.
Gary Kleiman.
Here.
Carl Seidman.
Here.
And I'm Paul Bohm. We have a quorum. Let me just confirm that Rich, you'll be taking minutes for this meeting once again.
Thank
Okay.
you, Rich.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. So great. We have a pretty full agenda. Some people have asked me specifically what's going to be discussed, and I tell them, look at the agenda. But I also tell them a lot of our topics tend to morph into other topics, so which is quite natural. And I think that will be the case tonight as well. Let me start out with just a few, I guess, news announcements. Then we'll get into the agenda. I've had discussions with the Parashar Patel. This is at the chair's breakfast about FinCom's interest in this activity. He's the chair of FinCom, and we agreed, and he would like to establish a liaison to this task force. There will be financial matters percolating up and down around, especially when it comes to the financial issues of managing and owning the site, but certainly financial issues leading up to the site. It turns out that this activity is on their, I don't know if it's top 6 or top 10 items that FinCom is exploring. So they're quite interested. So I don't think there'll be a member tonight. I did tell him that we discuss it. And are there any objections to that occurring?
Of course not.
Okay, good. I didn't think there would be. So so I think somebody will be appointed and will attend some of the meetings, not all of them, depends on the agenda. But I do think financial issues are going to be coming up quite regularly and intermittently. The second item, and Karen knows this, EPA is going to be holding a public meeting on October 11th. It is a meeting, it's an EPA meeting, and I assume it's to update the public on the status of the cleanup of the site. I did mention to Kara that there's likely to be some questions about things that we're doing. And so I think she's agreed to pop in a couple of slides just as a preliminary notification that there are other things going on in town. To that end, that also triggered something that I want to discuss later in the agenda, and that's sort of scheduling our public forum, a public hearing. Let's talk about that later, but I think it would be a logical sequence. In October, EPA is talking about the site, that soon thereafter we brief the public, enlighten the public, whatever we want to put on that agenda. So keep that in mind. We're going to return to that a little bit later.
Paul, just to clarifying, did you say that the meeting EPA scheduling is October 11th? That's the same night as one of our scheduled meetings?
No, is it? I didn't look far in advance in October. Is that one of our meetings?
Oh, no, never mind. It's an
Okay.
NRC meeting, not 2229. Never mind.
Okay. Speaking of future meetings, I know we've scheduled things out in the future. The alternating morning meeting, evening meeting on Tuesdays every other week. 2 questions. In August, I would like to have these meetings as virtual meetings. I know there's some preference to have in-person meetings, and that's my preference as well. I'm just a moving target, and so if we can do the next 2 meetings in August virtually, then we can return, after Labor Day to in-person meetings, if that is agreeable to the task force. Yep.
Mhm.
Any objections? Okay, great. So those are on the calendar for August. And then we'll discuss future meetings. So In terms of frequency of meetings, I still think there's a lot to discuss. We're can get into the mode of doing actual work and interfacing with our support colleagues, and we'll talk about some of those later. So I think there's going to be a lot to talk about at each meeting. So I think in the future we may have a special topic, but we'll probably just open it up to sort of short briefings by each work stream for what's going on, and have that more informal. You know, if they're presentations, that's fine, but so I do think until we feel that we have too many meetings, I'd like to keep them twice a month, especially leading up to this public forum, which if it occurs in the fall, we're going to need a lot of discussion around that. So that probably means that September and October we'll still have meetings twice a month, but they'll be in-person meetings. So I just want to, is that any comments on the scheduling or anything I've just kind of talked about? Okay. Let me turn to the agenda. Let me see. Now I have to share this first, of course. Oh, and I want to welcome others on the Zoom. Forgive me for not doing that. Terry Ackerman, our select board liaison, Kara Nirenberg from EPA, Pam Rockwell, associate member of the task force, Megan Samuto, and Chris Carmody, our staff support, Kat West from SKIO, and we may have other people joining us. So glad everybody's here. Let me just okay, the first thing on our agenda is the approval of the letter to the town manager on legal assistance. So just a little bit of background, because there has been offline discussion about this. I don't know how to describe this, but so Mina was preparing a budget to go to the select board. There isn't any established budget that the select board established for this task force. So the protocol, the sequence was the task force should really speak to the town manager, let her know what resources will be needed, give her some sense of what the scope is, give her some sense of what the cost estimates are, and that would be the first sequence. So we've kind of backed up a little bit, and we have the letter that has received your comments and plus comments from our from Chris and Megan. So that's sitting there to take a look at or to talk about. What I'm looking for today is, and can you all see this?
Yes.
The letter? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So this is in your packet. It hasn't changed. It's basically a description of the background of what we're doing, the fact that the select board has asked us to consider items that require legal assistance. The select board has asked us to work with town council. There's no surprise that we're going to need help from town council. We did put in here the scope of work, and we had discussed this amongst our task force and discussed it with Mina Markarias. So I think we're all aligned. So I think this is set to go to Carrie as a background. At the end of this, we have, I think Megan and Chris and I have seen an estimate of, I think, roughly 25K for those scope items. So I did want to cite that in here, although this isn't an official proposal. And you'll see I've asked for Carrie for her approval and for her to solicit or receive a direct proposal from town council. I've also mentioned in here that there's an expectation, you'll see here,
Mhm.
that there be a request for a budget supplement, because what this particular scope carries us to the point of making recommendations to the select board. If there are negotiations thereafter, I think town council would be involved. So that's not in this current scope because we don't know what the recommendation is going to be. So I think everything's in there. So to give Carrie a heads up on what we're looking for. So I'll open this up for comment, if any. Are there any comments or further edits or clarifications? If not, can I have a motion to approve and submit this letter?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Okay,
Okay. If mine wasn't the motion, I'll be the seconder.
okay, so let me just do a roll call vote. Signify yes or no. David Ropeik,
Yes.
Carrie Flood,
Yes,
Kurt Herman,
Yes.
Rich Feely,
Yes.
Carl Seidman,
Yes.
Paul Bohm, yes, Gary Kleiman.
Yes.
Did I miss anybody? Did not miss any task force members. Good. Unanimity is all great. So, okay, great. We've gone through that agenda item. So that letter will go in. I want to introduce the next topic. Let me just get rid of. So the next topic is I'm calling this the reuse safety and risk work stream discussion. And I know there are a couple of components of that. In conversations with both Megan and Chris, you all know that we have support through a separate activity that RU is undertaking. RU is under contract with the town through a TAG grant. And you've seen the scope of work on that. And there's also been some comment when RU was presenting about the fact that we would probably need support from RU that goes beyond the scope of work that's currently been funded. So as we go through the next segment here on risk communications, and also remembering that Gary Kleiman had made the observation, okay, they're funded through tasks 1, 2, and 3. What about 4, 5, and 6? Between now and the next meeting, I'd like us to think about what additional support we may need along the lines of safety, risk communications from RU that isn't funded, because in parallel with what the letter I've just prepared for, and we just voted on to town manager on town council, I'd like to prepare another letter asking her for support, additional support for those additional scope items from RU. Now, that funding may come from additional TAG grants that I know Chris and Megan are working on, or they may come from other funds. Right now, where the funding comes from is not our immediate concern. I think our immediate concern is what other support we're going to need from RU. So I want to kind of return to that topic as we're going through risk communication, risk assessment, and as I mentioned earlier, that whole activity overlaps with the whole reuse segment, which is why Kat, when Kat, you asked me if this was just going to be a meeting about risk, I said, well, we're going to morph into reuse, I'm sure, because reuse and risk assessment, various parts of the site are really integrated or will be integrated. So with that as a long-winded preamble, does anybody have any comments or questions on what I've just talked about? Okay. So David, we didn't have enough time for the last discussion, so let's move into this. And David reminded me that the risk, I'm calling it the risk and safety area, has been bifurcated into risk communications, which is David is leading that, and risk assessment, and Kurt is leading that. I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'm not sure you'll be talking about both of those here, but so why don't you take it away, David?
Well, I'll just be talking about the risk communication part. Kurt and I have had a discussion about our various roles, and it seemed that bifurcation made more sense, especially given our different expertises. Let me start with a kind of a step back. First of all, I'm glad to hear that Kara and EPA are planning their meeting. I had talked with her at our site visit about coordinating with her about that, and I'm surprised but pleased to hear that that's moving forward in October. When I taught risk communication and consulted in it for years, I found that a lot of people had different thoughts about what it meant. And I think it behooves us to be on a relatively common page about what it actually means. Doesn't mean just throwing up a meeting. It doesn't mean posting things on a website. It doesn't mean just putting things in a newspaper, et cetera. It has in my mind, and in my mind and in most projects, it has it can be approached more effectively with a richer kind of an understanding. Can you put up the slides? You want to do this switching, Paul, or I can if you want? Yeah. I got them.
Yeah,
I
why
just
why don't you share it? Go ahead.
I got it. Share. Everybody good?
Yep.
Okay, so the first 4 slides we'll go through very quickly. These are the things that in the charge seem to fall under risk communication. And my line in red there speaks to how soon or not we need to deal with those tasks. So this one seems to be down the road. Outline a detailed plan timetable, including risk communication. It seemed to be outlining risk communication for the select board if the recommendation, so this doesn't happen until the recommendation's made, is to require, then we help out in our report with some recommendations about risk communication. If my reading on that is something that we all agree on, that is not an immediate task. That's number one. Anybody have any different thoughts about that? It seems to be in the context when our recommendation is made, ergo, therefore, something to be made to the select board, not something that we would do, the risk communication itself. Is that everybody?
I think so. I'm mindful that the select board is always focused on all aspects of risk, and we may need a risk communication between the task force and the select board.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a little bit different than what you're talking about here, but that may be something we do even before our report.
And during all our meetings, and it is one of the later tasks in this 4 that I'm outlining. So
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
no, that's quite all right. So the next one is hold a public hearing about getting public comments on reuse. To me, that's been done quite successfully. And we have a thorough document of that. There was outreach to the town about who got to participate. In my opinion, a hearing on this sort of thing is accomplished. To solicit preliminary public comments and suggestions regarding reuse, that's been accomplished, in my opinion. Is that not everybody else's sense?
I would just jumping in. I mean, I would agree with you that it has been done in a preliminary fashion. What I would recall, and Paul can correct me, Pam can correct me if I have this wrong, but I recall at those public fora, we always said, don't worry, there'll be another chance to weigh in.
Okay.
So yes, I agree with you that the preliminary, like, what do you envision for this site? What kinds of uses would you like to see here? That has been done. But we did tell people they would have another bite at the apple. So
Yeah, I would agree with that description, that it's been, the preliminary one's been done, but it's going to come up. It's central to our charge and needs to be part of the communication that we ultimately do as well. But I'm just ordering the parts in the charge so that we can prioritize the things to get started on sooner or later. So that's just what this red line is, not successfully finished, but the first step taken care of.
It seems,
Go ahead. Let's
you want the hand raised? Let's
let's
see
raise
where-
our hands. I'm sorry. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems to me that there may be people who have not paid attention over the last few years. And now we've got a new committee, we've got some voices who have been involved and others like myself who have been watching from the sidelines. We've just done a tour. The site looks very different than it did a couple of years ago. And I was interested to see how many neighbors showed up and participated and walked around. So I would say that there is a review, in that public hearing fairly early, not next month and so forth, probably after the EPA thing, to review what people were hearing, what committee people were hearing from the public in those meetings. Here's what might be new information and or what questions have come to people's mind. What are their concerns now that there is more information and a more public viewing, if you will, of the issues here?
I second that and add that Kara told me that during the site visit that one of the goals of the public meeting that she's trying to put together by the EPA is to find communities that have not yet been engaged.
Right.
So yes, that's obviously part of, it's actually the next step in my slides.
Okay.
But I'm just prioritizing things as we go. Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
Terry?
Yeah, Terry.
Well, Carrie, much more eloquently than me explained, I'm the one who wrote the first draft of the charge, and the rest of the board agreed that even though it has been successfully done by your predecessor committee, there are new communities who haven't been paying attention. How can we get them involved?
Mhm.
There is new information, et cetera, so that it does need to be done again by this committee. So I guess if you go back one slide for a second,
Sorry.
I would argue that this has been quite successfully done. Yes, it has, but we still wanted this committee to hold a public hearing again.
Of course.
And worst case, no one shows up, there's no concerns, no issues. Okay, we wasted some time, you can have a regular meeting. That's a worst case, but anyway, that's.
Yeah, I just want to add that it's been a while since we got the public input,
Right.
and this site has received a lot of attention recently
Mhm.
by town departments, in towns. So I think the whole nature of the public interest may be changing. So I think a refresher on that, I agree. When to do that and how to do it is something we need to discuss. I think in the context of the public hearing discussion that I teed up earlier, I think we have to determine if there's a public hearing or a series of public hearings, and if there's a separate one just to solicit comments. So I think I do agree we're going to need some more input on this. But remember that Gary and Rich are getting hopefully a lot of public input with our help, but it's not in a public forum. So let's see what transpires in the next couple of months. But I don't think we have accomplished this totally.
I would agree. And this is why I mentioned at the very beginning before these slides that risk communication is more than the public hearing. A lot more, which I'll get to in just a moment. But
Yeah.
All these ongoing conversations, for example, their risk communication, how we communicated with the neighbors who were with us on the site visit is risk communication. Risk communication cumulatively is managing the relationship between parties in this conversation. So there's trust, and that the information that we have to offer will be more trusted and useful as people make up their minds. That's the much broader charge than just hold a public hearing. So please think of things. I offer to you that has been a successful way to think of risk communication, much more relationship management. I'll get to that in 2 or 3 slides than just the public hearing. So let me just move on a little bit.
Well, no, just I want to get to Pam, but I do have a comment.
I'm sorry.
I just want to point out that I'm not sure that I want to say that we don't want to do a risk communication with the public, that we want to be directing that just at the select board, because I think every time we have a site visit, we have a public hearing, we have a presentation of the risk assessment, we have those things that we should be doing as much risk communication as we can, because that takes the edge off of what might be happening elsewhere. So I just want to point that out. I don't think we've necessarily completed those first two items completely.
Okay, well, this charge, the way it's written here, really is not risk communication. Literally, this is getting input on reuse. And I'm sort of mindful that there's that risk and reuse go together, but let's move on from this. I want to mention just one thing in terms of public hearing on risk. And this is something I want to get back to. So RU in their charge is tasked with having a public hearing on risk, so a very specific public hearing on the risk and safety of various reuses of the site. So we need to think about how we're going to coordinate this piece, David, risk communication, whether it's a general risk communication, very specific based on specific reuses. We're going to have to start coordinating with RU in terms of how we take this issue to the public. I'm just throw that out there.
It's one of the final steps that the slide pack closes with.
Okay.
I want to reassure Pam that I wasn't suggesting for a moment that there not be public communication or public hearings about this. Just that I'm trying to prioritize where we get started and how. That's all.
Yep.
So the get started sooner is this public meeting to think about, and I look forward to talking to you, Kara, about how we can, I don't know, work together, coordinate, I don't know, whatever word you're comfortable with, so that there is either an overlap with or input from, et cetera, these various meetings. That's that one. And finally, in this charge, there were under risk communication, the phrase written reports. And I think my summary is that gets put in the report that we make to the select board when we get to that point. I just wanted to make sure that as I read the charge, looking for my responsibilities, is something that everybody kind of sees the same way.
Can you go back one slide, please?
Sure.
So I don't want anybody to take this comment the wrong way, especially EPA. But I think this task force has established a bit of space and distance between what we're doing and what EPA is doing. I don't want to say that we are aligned in our interests, I'll tell you that, but it can be perceived as something otherwise if we are part of an EPA meeting. So, we'll have to think about this. My thought is that if we do a public communication on the site, that this task force does it independent of EPA. Just throwing that out there. Is any comments, yay or nay on that before Kara jumps in and kicks me in the head?
So would that be that we're part of the audience to hear what the EPA is talking about? And to hear what other reactions people outside of our committee might have.
Well, Kara will speak to this in a minute, but the October 11th meeting is an update on the cleanup. I'm not sure it's a risk issue, whatever. And I'm not sure if EPA has any plans for separate.
No, I don't see it as being focused on the risk. I see it as focused on what are perceived as the facts at that point, which may bring up questions that the public has not known enough to ask prior to this.
Right, and that's why. So we will be an audience on the 11th, but Kara will sort of tip her cap to us and acknowledge that we are working on various things. So, Kara, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, just what I want to chime in on is, so my kind of current plan vision for this meeting in October is to really just provide kind of the base of where you guys are, the kind of background. And so again, maybe I spoke that wrong, not related to what you're necessarily doing, but providing that background to the site to people who haven't been following it throughout time. So a bit of, this is the history of the site. This is how it came into Superfund. This is what Superfund does. And this is what we're doing now. So kind of just these building blocks of the process without diving into the nitty-gritty details of the remediation and not diving into the work that you're doing, but kind of just providing that kind of background support. If someone had no knowledge of the site, they've driven by it and they don't, oh, I've always wondered what that thing on the hill is up there, that kind of level of information. And then, honestly, my plan from there is to say, if you're interested in getting more involved with your community on the site, you can reach out to EPA for kind of site specific questions, and Concord has these groups that they're also working with. And they'll have more information for you too, but kind of just a predecessor to anything that you guys might be doing, but not necessarily linked to your work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And not to repeat myself, when I heard this was happening, I immediately said, Carrie, you're going to get questions that relate to, okay, so what are we going to do with the site? Is it safe? Is it risky? Blah, blah, blah. And I think we are not going to be answering those questions at the meeting, but I think Carol will have 1 or 2 slides just tipping off that those things are happening. Those issues are being addressed by this task force, and independently by the oversight committee, which is still monitoring. We have 2 committees which are still in business here.
Pardon me for interjecting, Paul. Of course, we should have different hearings. We are a different audience. We are a different body. There's a different level of trust, all sorts of reasons why your question is, in my opinion, yes, of course, we should have separate risk communication, relationship management chains, not just a meeting. Absolutely. We are a different body. We have different relationships with the people in town. We have a different charge. Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, when I say we're aligned with EPA, I think both EPA and the town wants this property to be a productive property. Whether we own it, somebody else owns it, it's being cleaned up at great public expense, so it becomes an asset to the community, whether that's private ownership or municipal ownership. So that's when they say we're aligned in that respect. Kurt.
Oh, I agree with the approach of separate meetings with separate focus and charge. I think having them sequentially with EPA first will help hear what questions are being raised and will help inform the focus of our meeting. It'll also help us understand who's attending and who may not be attending that should be. So I think having it in sequence can be a tremendous advantage to us.
Yeah, and thanks, Kara, for kind of triggering the timing, because we were we kind of kicked the can down the road, in terms of when we were going to do this public hearing. But now, since you're doing it in October, I said, yeah, okay, we should do one in the fall as well.
If I can go forward to some of the specifics that I had in mind of just what the conversation. Oh, Pam, you had your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, can I ask Kara, the meeting, is there a particular deliverable that's coming up? One of the remediation plans that's going to be discussed?
No, again, this is going to be a very, I don't want to call it non-technical, but essentially a non-technical meeting, really a site overview, introduction to NMI, what's been done and what's happening and what's going to happen.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. So let's keep focus on the agenda here. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry to cut you off, Pam. Let me move to, I've already mentioned this. The idea of risk communication is not just about the meeting. It is not just about the meeting. I can't say this enough. It is not just about the meeting. It's about how people take the work that we're doing, the conversations that we have, all of the interactions in town. The meeting is one important part of the meeting. There might be more, but it's about how this committee is seen, how we interact with folks in town, up and down the chain, various audiences. And to that end, let me go right to this. So this is a thought chart about the various steps that go into a thoughtful risk communication plan. You don't just start planning a meeting and look for the words to say. You think all these things through. And I needn't go through all the columns because they're self-obvious. Well, maybe the second column a little bit. There are reasons emotionally why risk means different things to different people. They have to be respected. Those emotional reasons why risk means different things to different people. Is it related to cancer? That makes it scarier. The risk feels from this site as though it was imposed as opposed to something we do voluntarily. That makes it feel differently. There's uncertainty about a risk that's invisible with unknowns about what could be happening in the future. We've heard those questions asked. There's mistrust of various governments. There's stigma to some of the words. Oh my gosh, we're dealing with nuclear. We're dealing with radiation. We're dealing with chemicals. We're dealing with Superfund. Have I just hit 4 big areas that are all torches to the flame of a potential fire of concern? Rightly so. They have to be understood. They have to be understood and incorporated into our planning so that when we then take the next steps down the chart, we are thinking of those people's feelings, if you will, to be very simplified, with respect on the top of our minds, not just what to say, but how do people feel? Then we think about who are our audiences. And we all need your help. Well, I'll get to tasks and at the very end of this, but we all need everybody in this committee, as I said 2 weeks ago now, to send, I'll coordinate this, Paul, or you can designate whoever coordinates this, I guess it's me. Who should we talk to? And there are specific audiences that I've listed, but in this column, but there might be more. There probably are more. I'm a newbie to this. You guys probably have way more suggestions. I've asked some of you several times about this, and it's been kind of vague. We need to get specific about who we're talking to. Then how we talk to them is not just the meeting. In fact, as Kurt pointed out, the EPA meeting allows us to what? Identify what people's concerns are. Well, we can do that lots of ways and should, absolutely must, so that we have thought that through before the meeting and other interactions. We need to look to more facile ways to reach out to people, small group conversations. Hey, I'll meet you at Cafe Nero and we'll talk for half an hour. Whoever these audiences are that we identify, and have separate conversation with various groups and various individuals. What's on your mind about the site? Very open, but fact-finding about what their concerns are. Because these meetings aren't just to tell them what we want to tell them. It's to address what their concerns are. That's a more respectful way so that they'll trust that we're doing this in a way that they'll be supportive of. And then finally, this column of who talks, sorry, I'm hitting my wrong buttons. Who talks, I hit it wrong again. Who talks is a very interesting question. I mean, I know risk communication and I'm an okay talker, but there are people in this group who are more credible than me. Who talks, by the way, should mostly be an issue of trust. Whoever's talking to someone at the Cafe Nero or on the phone or in any of these interactions or at the EPA meeting or our meeting, the most trusted sources are the ones who should be the leaders in the conversation, because again, of the importance of relationship management. So I don't know who that would be, and we can have a conversation about whether that should be Paul or Gary or Kurt or Rue or whomever, but we need to think strategically about that and designate those, and they'll vary depending on who our audiences are. If we're talking to an environmental activist group in Concord, that might be a different who talks to them than reuse or neighbors conversation, right? Of course. So we think about all of that. And then finally, in our little, close that if I can. There it is. So this is what we need, I think, first to get to. This outreach and conversations with these key audiences, especially the people in the environmentally active community who are likely to be more passionate, if you will, about those buzzwords that I was talking about, and meet at their convenience rather than ours as a gesture of trust building. And this is the specific,
Dave.
initial task list. Yes.
David, you could go back to that slide, please, because there's one word in there. The last word on the right and the heading is messages. I think that we have to decide how to message, what our messages are.
Of course,
Yeah, I'm just saying it's not intuitively obvious to everybody because there are a lot of words. There's risk, there's cancer, there's blah, blah. There's radiation. There's lots of things that could get in the way and lots of misinformation that could get out there. But we have to assemble our messages based on facts, based on what we're doing, based on us, strong commitment and belief. And when we talk to people, we have to all have the same messages. And I'm not saying a script, but and I could offer some now. Here's a message, okay? The site is being cleaned up, for $250 million to residential standards, and the achievement of those standards is being closely monitored. And we're not just deciding that the site can be used. We're looking at individual areas of the site. What's the most appropriate use based on what was there, what's going to be there? And so we're taking a very granular and very systematic approach to identifying if there are residual risk and are the reuses safe. That's a very wordy type of messaging, but I think we have to make sure that when we go public, individually or as a group, our messaging is quite crisp and clear and doesn't litigate the risk issues of the past, but looks to the future, sort of what Rue is doing. They're looking at, okay, what's this going to look like when it's cleaned up? So what I said is just probably totally obvious, but I think messaging and messages are extremely important as we communicate.
two things to point out. Of course, you're absolutely right that even when we have these initial conversations with folks, we have to have gotten some messages that we're all kind of comfortable with. But those first conversations are listening conversations, information gathering conversations. They're all of these steps are prior to. Now, what do we do? Now, what do we say? Now, what do we say at the meeting and who talks and so forth? So we're gathering information in all of these previous steps. So we're thinking about things strategically instead of just going right to messages. If we go right to messages, for example, we don't think about the emotions that might be involved. We have to do these other steps first in order to be comprehensive. So you're absolutely right, of course, Paul. But notice also in that column that the first word isn't messages, it's actions. And what we do in terms of relationship management, which has a lot to do with people's emotions about how they feel about all this, what we do will matter as much as or more than what we say. If we are open, if we are transparent, if we reach out, if we are comprehensive and don't forget to ask a neighbor or an environmental group or whoever, then we're demonstrating by what we do, not just the words that we say at a meeting, that we are engaged in relationship management and respect with the community, as we then give them the information that we've gathered, which we will in our messages, so that our work will be more trusted. So you're absolutely right. I just wanted to make that distinction.
Okay, and Carl and then Kurt.
Yeah. Well, David, no, I agree with this. I think it's excellent. It does strike me that what we've laid out here is sort of our intentional risk communication plan. And I just, people get information from many, many different sources now. And people can be exposed to or believe or disseminate, information from unreliable sources, misinformation.
Oh my gosh.
And so I just wonder, how do we anticipate that? How does the committee work not only intentionally to develop these relationships and listen and learn and communicate, but I guess respond to misinformation or, you know, rumors or other things that might be being promoted or circulated.
This is an excellent question. And in a full risk communication plan, there'd be somebody designated to monitor all the various media places people might be talking about it. Literally. So I can kind of start to do that and monitor Concord listservs. We can talk about putting a newspaper article in to lay a foundation pretty soon, pretty quickly, to be out in front of the story as opposed to reacting to the story. The concept is called framing. Whoever paints the picture first, that's the picture to which everyone else is responding. These are specific concrete steps, Rich. So absolutely spot on to the actual concrete risk communication plan that has to be developed. We have to figure out how, and I'll need all of your help as the person probably responsible for this, for monitoring all that, with your suggestions as to where people might be talking about it, because cumulatively, you guys know this better than I and the town better than I alone. So a point taken for all of us, what our partner just said, keep your ear open to conversations and share them with all of us, of course, but this risk communication challenge. Was there another question?
Kurt.
I was just going to make the point regarding messages, how I think it's going to evolve over time, just based on where we are in the process. And I think the initial charge around the message is something along the lines of, we're here to listen to your concerns so that we can respond to them in the appropriate way.
Among all the research we're doing, your concerns need to inform our work as well. Something like that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then that feeds into the work Rue is doing. So we make sure, almost like a funnel, so that we're identifying as many concerns as we can early on, so that the message that we relay when we have a firmer grasp on the redevelopment scenarios and that kind of pin down, there are no surprises down the road.
Let me add, Kurt, and I have been remiss in making this clear, and Paul makes it with his point about messages. I'm not saying that all we do is respond to people's concerns. That's all I've said tonight, it seems like.
Yeah.
Of course, we have our own messages. They are the center of what we're doing. But if they don't include a response to people's concerns, we can shoot ourselves in the head with just teaching them what we want to say. So it's a mix of both. Paul, can you help clarify for me? I thought in the Rue presentation that they took it upon, that they thought that part of their work was to help us with advice about communication, not literally hold their own meeting. This is the first I've heard of that.
Oh, Chris, I don't have this scope in front of me. Is a public presentation in their current scope?
They, in their proposal, they have outlined 7 tasks. The first 3 are document review, site visit, and stakeholder engagement, and draft a reuse human health risk assessment. The other 4 tasks haven't really contractually been agreed to yet, but they proposed present findings to the select board, finalize the human risk assessment, develop a public engagement strategy, and their 7th is execute a public engagement strategy.
Okay, so that's it's to be determined and coordinated. Thank you.
But they are offering expertise in the first 3 on stakeholder engagement, expertise on, rather than a meeting. And that's why I put number 4 on this slide, that I should reach out to them and have this coordinating conversation with them so that we're on a similar page. And by the way, again, these are initial steps. I've already started thinking about messaging and actions we can take, but this is preliminary because I haven't had a chance to present any of this to the committee and have your comments included. So these are just 4 very early initial steps. And that's
Okay.
the end of my little hoo-ha.
Pam?
So do we actually know when the Rue team is going to have their work done? Chris?
Yeah, so they need to review some data, and we're just getting a sense for what data is missing from all the data that's been posted to the EPA's website and to the town's website, and there appears to be a little bit of a gap. So we'll talk to Kara about that later. And the work by Rue by contract is designed to be done by June 30th, 2024. So we've got a little bit of time.
Okay, well, no, what I was thinking is that we have this EPA meeting coming up, and the EPA meeting is a wonderful thing for us to focus on. We can encourage people to come to this EPA meeting as part of what we're doing. And then we can be prepared with materials to have them communicate with us and make it clear that we're going to have our own presentation about our risk assessors looking at this site and our view, our assessments of what it's safe to do and what we could do with it as a sort of a response to that.
Pam, pardon my
Being really
interrupting.
ready and getting people to that meeting, getting them signed up so that we know who's interested.
Pardon my interrupting, but this is why I was stressing to Kara when we talked about this briefly at the site visit, the importance of our coordinating with her about their meetings. So I'm glad and surprised to hear that it's been scheduled, but that coordination absolutely should be done. I can't second that.
Okay, good idea. Gary,
Yeah, sorry. First of all, just wanted to note, I popped down to Haiti and I don't
Yeah, I
have a
thank
pill
you
in
for
my
the
hand
chance.
yet, but it sounded like a good idea.
At least you don't have a drink in your hand.
Not yet. I totally agree that the coordination with EPA is a great idea, and I think we could do a nice, effective 1-2 punch. I think the same is true of RU. I think RU can serve as, like EPA, can serve as introducing the site and introducing what's going on to all of the audiences David has in mind and those that will identify. I think similarly, RU can be used to, not used, but can be effective in presenting whatever risk information that we think is consistent with our messages or that the public seems to be clamoring for in a way that's coordinated. So I totally agree. And I trust David to help us coordinate how to use all of the tools in our arsenal. I just want to say that on the assignment that I heard back on the site visit, you asked us, David, to think about audiences. And I've been doing that, and I have 2 audiences that I wanted to share with the group, but I wanted to get David's assessment as to whether I'm doing this the right way, whether I'm being too callous in my assessment. But I mean, to me, just using the cold calculus of getting any suggestion or any proposal or any thoughts on what we might like to do in terms of reuse at the site, if we decide to actually acquire, getting anything past a town meeting, it seems to me there's 2 key audiences. It's the mommy and daddy cohort, because time and again, when there's any issue of significance or controversy, whether it's a new school, the school budgets, the turf fields, cannabis, zoning, anything, when you get mommy and daddy to show up at town meeting, they're the ones who decide how it's going to go. And the second audience that I would mention, and again, I apologize if this is seeming too crude or callous, but it's the Council on Aging set, that if mommy and daddy don't show up, the ones left in the room tend to be our seniors. So, I mean, it just seems to me that we definitely need to be doing outreach to parents and to seniors. And that's just like sort of more political calculus. But I want to hear from David, like, that's probably like the bottom of the list in terms of, effective risk communication, where we're trying to establish a relationship and,
No. It's the relationship is with everybody who's going to want to have a say in this. And so remember, our report is just recommendations to the standing committee. And the standing committee charge, as I read it, is guidance on how to handle what you just were talking about, Gary. So our laying those foundations now is going to be important if we decide to acquire, right? Or even if we don't, the town might want to pass judgment on what we've done, and the selectmen will put that up to the town. So we do need to be thinking about those general political things. I was just demonstrating that obviously, the environmental groups in town or the neighbors are a more targeted audience, but please, everybody think as strategically as all of that. And then what it comes to is, I know a couple people in town, I'll call you, I'll call Paul, I'll call whomever and say, who would the right person be? And we can start the targeting. By the way, one thing about RU, great resource, except in risk communication with trust being important, we've hired them. That means that somebody who isn't going to trust us isn't going to trust them. So we have to be judicious about that. Here are experts, independent experts, but we paid them. and people can see it that way, but that's a small strategic thing to think of later.
Well, and then Frank, Rich, just a minute. I think it's a good point, which suggests that, how should I put it, we have to do our own work. I think that it can be supplemented if we come with Rue and Skio and town council and their advisors, but we have to do our own work. We have to, put our names behind it. We have the capability, as I look around this room, of handling every part of this if we had the time. Fortunately, we have resources, so we can delegate some of that. But I think, yes, we have to rely on Rue and others, but we have to do a very deep audit on everything that they produce.
And to second that quickly, Paul, so we can get to Rich's comment, the people who are in this committee and Pam Rockwell and your committee are vital to the risk communication effort to establish trust, because you guys have been representing us and the community and our concerns about safety for a long time and have way more trust because of that. You have a well of trust to tap that we need to think of strategically as a value.
Okay, Rich.
Yeah, I like David's idea that we need to have small informal discussions with all or almost all potential interest groups. And I divide them into two groups, those who are generally concerned and those who may have an interest in using some portion of the site. But we need to talk to all of them. For the second group, we also need to talk about what they want from the site and what their concerns are about using it. But I think the first step has got to be, we all need to sit down and come up with our list of who we think should be talked to in these small meetings and send it to David. And then maybe David, you and Paul say, okay, if we want to talk housing, we can talk to Keith Bergman, me, or somebody else. If we want to talk to, we feel that the general environmental movement is important, who's going to talk to mothers out front, stuff like that. So I'm just saying, I think the first step is we need a list of people we ought to have these coffees with and figure out who's the best person to talk to them. And in some cases, the talk about their concerns also has to be a talk about their uses or potential uses for the site.
Let me just add, I couldn't second that more, but let me add, as Paul has pointed out, it's super important. When we're listening, they're going to ask us questions. We have to have some basic agreed upon set of messages, whether it's we're just hearing you out or here's what our role is, etc. And I will get to work post this meeting, drawing up some drafts that we can all hash out so that we have talking points, general consensus on what we would say during these conversations with these people, as opposed to just taking notes.
Yeah, I think there's two parallel tasks, David. You do that, we suggest people or groups we should be talking to. We match the right committee member. We get your messaging material, and then we start buying people coffee.
So let me say, I think a couple of general comments. Inviting input. I think open-ended invitations for what are your concerns is really not a productive way to proceed. I'm not saying anybody's suggesting that. We are at the point now where any conversation about safety and risk needs to have a context of reuse. And I think Rich just pointed to it. If we're talking to the housing people, it's, okay, we think that we can put housing over here, and this is why. What are your concerns with that? So I think any conversation that we have with the mommies and daddies, with the council on aging, anybody, has to be a conversation that has some context to it. And I think the context is probably reuse. This isn't like the conversations that we had when the reuse committee, it was like everybody was all over the place. Well, we're not going to set foot on the Superfund side. We will never put housing there because there's radioactivity. Calm down. We have to create the educated context for having those conversations. That's not easy to do because we don't want to lead the witness, but at the same time, we don't want to, have an open-ended free-for-all and all the general concerns. Do you get my drift, what I'm talking about, and how
And
to
you're
navigate this?
As
Yeah.
I've been thinking about the message, you're absolutely right. Our charge is to help the town think about what to do with going forward this property. People are going to have risk questions within that, but within that, it's not just about the boogeyman that it was at the beginning. Our charge is the framing message. Here's what we're about is the framing message. Absolutely.
And that's why, Rue is basically looking at what the site's going to be and what we can use and talk about safety and risk in the context of reuses. And I think that is a really productive way to invite concerns and have a conversation.
Yeah.
Pam, again?
I'm just still focused on, I think a great way to connect with people is to actually publicize the EPA meeting and publicize it with Mothers Out Front and the League of Women Voters and maybe First Parish, and whether that's the Council on Aging or whatever, continuing to focus on that's a way to start a conversation and to make those contacts, and then say, do you want me to come, talk to you about this before you send it out? If we could have a set of materials from EPA to go ahead and use, social media, to email out to somebody a meeting invite and maybe the fact sheet that's there for that meeting, and then talk about how, the next steps will be reuse. And we might want to have our meeting scheduled so that we can say, and this, we're going to follow on that with a public hearing after.
I think we do have to have that scheduled. You have to be prepared for that. And we have to use the meeting to communicate, sort of beyond cleanup. This is beyond cleanup. EPA is going to be talking about cleanup.
Right.
And no offense, EPA, cleanup's not going to be done. They're going to be talking about what they've done and what needs to be done. So there's still going to be a lot of loose cleanup ends, which if I'm in the audience, I'm going to say, oh God, it's not cleaned up yet. The holding basin's not even done yet. And so it's, I think we have to carefully coordinate and use that opportunity, EPA's meeting opportunity, to kind of launch our own outreach. I agree. Was there another hand raised here?
Oh, I had my hand raised. It was just a question about the forum for the EPA meeting. Will that be at the site or will it be virtual? Just curious if that's been pinned down yet, Kara.
So it's going to be in Concord, and we'll try and do it hybrid. So in person and virtual.
Okay.
I think, Chris, you've reserved the hearing room at the townhouse.
At the townhouse, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I intend, having heard about this meeting now being scheduled, is to work with Kara so that we do get something in the Concord Bridge about what our role is before the EPA meeting, to lay this framing foundation that we're out there and what we're doing and how it overlaps with, but is different than the EPA. And maybe we can do that in connection with the story that's about the EPA meeting that's coming up, but somewhere to get our unique voice in play in people's minds in the community, as kind of Pam was suggesting, in connection with, but prior to the EPA meeting. That's a concrete tactical step to take, I think.
But let's think about having when your meeting is going to be.
Well, what the meaning is going to be, and it's so. Yes, I think let's put that on the agenda for the next meeting to kind of think through our first public meeting, whether it's informational, whether it's a specific topic, whether it covers the 4 different topics at the 10,000 foot level. What do we want to do at that meeting? Because I think it's sort of our opening salvo in communicating what we're doing, and to build trust in what we're doing.
And as urgently as we want to get to that, and our charge requires us to, I do recommend again that we have our ducks in a row before we schedule that, in terms of having sounded out the town and thought about strategically some of the other stuff that I laid out. Going to the setting the date without having that stuff ready could put us in a corner coming to a meeting where we haven't done the homework that I think is going to be helpful.
I don't disagree, but at a very minimum, a briefing on what we're doing?
Yeah, we can do it very
Task force
simply. We can-
exists.
Sure, we can frame
Information,
it
here-
that way, sure.
Here's our scope. Could you input? What should we be doing? I mean.
Yep.
We
Can
could
use that
solicit
as part
those-
of the information gathering, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Carrie?
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest that we try to get something into the local paper early. So prior to announcing or inviting, encouraging people to come to the hearings, that here's this committee that's taking a fresh look, we've come a long way in a few years and, that, so people will know who's on the committee that they can ask questions of. Maybe somebody serving on a committee that they might share some stuff, who would reach back to us. I don't think there's a general understanding in the community at this present time that we even exist. You look at the list of people that are watching the public meetings, even when it's the Board of Selectmen, it's a relatively small number of people with a lot of very familiar names. And I just don't think we're well recognized yet. So getting it into the newspaper that's going to every household in town, they might not read the whole article the first time, but the second time they see something, oh yeah, I did, read a little bit about that. Okay, let's take a look. So that's my thinking right now.
Thank you. I want to give you a little piece of data. So there was at Rideout, there was a concert and the Recreation Commission Strategic Planning Group had a little tent. And as I mentioned, one of their displays was what they thought they could do to the 2229 site. And I was there for most of that, and Gary was there a little bit. I didn't get one question on risk. They looked at the site and they saw what the strategic planning people had, and it was soccer fields here and a field house here, and whether that's real or not. I got more questions about where we can do things in the site than I did. I didn't get one question on risk.
That's really good input to know. That's the kind of input that
That's
we're
interesting,
gathering
yeah.
so that we can think strategically about how to message and all of that sort of stuff. One quick thing about newspapers. The Concord Bridge being the kind of quasi-news paper that it is, unfortunately, takes printed stuff as press releases from various government bodies. Not my opinion as a journalist as to what a newspaper ought to do, but we could type up our own article with Kara, perhaps, to do what Carrie was suggesting. We needn't ask a reporter to come to us and then open it up that way. So that's a strategic thing to think of. I'd be glad to write that.
Last comment on this segment, Pam?
So I just want to say, I think we really need to think about whether we need to have a meeting before town meetings, hearings get ramped up in January. Is that what you would think, Chris?
Sorry, Pam, you faded out a little bit. Can you?
So if we're gonna have if there's gonna be a public meeting that follows the EPA meeting, we probably want it before the town meeting warrant comes out, right? Because after that, everybody's got hearings all the time and such.
Yeah, so the warrant, I think we'll open up on the second Tuesday in December, and then it'll stay open for a month, and then the public hearings will start in February. So we'll have some time to submit, or if that's the will of the task force. There's the warrant open period is from
No, I just mean that we might want to schedule a meeting when you're not having all your hearings.
Yeah.
So
I think
not that we would be submitting anything.
I think early on, I thought November-ish would be before Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So let's defer that total topic because it's a big one for the next meeting. Kurt, anything on the flip side of the risk did you want to discuss tonight?
No, I don't think specifically. I think it's going to be devil in the details of starting to flesh out the scenarios with Rue and make sure that the scenarios are responsive to the concerns. I don't want to get to the end of their work product and someone raises something that we haven't thought of. And that in part just depends on where we are with the redevelopment scenarios. So I think for now, it's a little bit of sitting tight and just letting them do their work and then trying to guide their efforts to make sure that it's aligned with where we're going in terms of our recommendation to the select board.
Okay, thank you. Which brings up a general topic, you know, these meetings are sort of, they're frequent, but you guys, the work stream should feel free to kind of work with SKIO, work with Rue, work with other people in between. And you know, we don't have town council on board yet, but I know that Kat has offered, Kat has a lot of, and neither Court nor Pam are on here, but we don't have to wait till Mina gets started, you know, to start probing kind of legal issues. So I think in general, and I know some of that's been going on already. So I just want to kind of reinforce that. The other part that just quickly, so Pam Rockwell unearthed with Kara's help and SKIO's help some municipalities, Carl, who are dealing with institutional controls. And she has a series of contacts of various, you may want to talk a little bit more about that, very little bit, but, you know, some experience and best practices for institutional controls, municipalities who've acquired sites, how they're doing it. So that's kind of the type of thing we don't, you know, it's information out there. I don't know if, Pam, if you shared that with Carl yet.
I did not yet. I shared it with you first because I didn't want to go around a quorum thing or something, but
Yeah, so I'll share that with Chris or Megan, and they'll share it with Carl. Or Megan or Chris, you can, if you have those contacts that I think you've been emailed, you know, please share them with Carl. This is
And
I
Karen.
and Carrie, I'm sorry. Yep, sorry. Keep forgetting the team. Okay, so Gary.
Just gonna build on your comment there. We have been working with SKIO. Rich and I have been doing some offline stuff, and so, you know, won't take a lot of time at tonight's meeting, but just as an update, you know, Rich is going to be drafting some letters for soliciting some of the market research data we talked about last time. All of the slides we presented last time are in your packet this month, so you can see that. But Rich is going to draft some letters to the various town departments about the kind of data that we'd like to get from town departments. SKIO is going to help us develop a 2-pager just describing the site and the master plan, so that could be a basis for us reaching out to not only those town departments, but also for them to reach out to private sector entities to start to gather some of that baseline, you know, like real estate information, school capacity, rec information, that kind of thing. And then we kind of divvied up the market research data between SKIO and Rich and I, and we'll, you know, be picking on some of you task force members to help us collect data once we have these letters ready. And then we'll check in again. I'm also trying to develop a little overlay of potential uses by zone that would be allowed, you know, using a zoning model like we discussed. And then we'll bring that back to the committee at one of our future meetings.
Thank you. Carl, quick comment, because I want to get to the.
Yeah, I was,
Go ahead.
I think for the operations work plan too, we're gonna have questions for city departments as well, of town departments as well. So it just raises the question of how do we coordinate that? Do we do it sequentially? You know, so.
Yeah, right now, Rich is drafting some draft letters that I think probably makes sense, Rich. We share it with the whole committee for review. So that would be the time, you know, but maybe hearing this.
Yeah, and I
think reach out
I
directly.
agree. I don't think we want two, you know, two separate groups from the committee, from the task force. Let's try and coordinate our requests, at least for the town entities. And then perhaps, you know, Carl or somebody could join us when we sit down with whoever we're sitting down in that potential municipal user.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we're having these meetings, and why I think subsequent meetings we'll be having just discussions about what everybody's doing, so we realize what these coordination points and interfaces are, because we have 4 work streams, but it's really just, they're all intertwined. They really are. So I wanted to spend a little time. I asked Chris on a special topic of insurance. The question that has come up in the past by a couple of people is, after we acquire the site, can we get insurance to protect us from, future problems? Not legacy problems, which should be all wrapped up in the whole acquisition part of it, but insurance in the future. So, Chris, if you can spend a few minutes kind of talking through that issue.
Yeah, thank you. I have a short slide deck I will pull up. Everyone see that?
Yes. Yep.
I'll be talking today on insurance for this Superfund site. We'll be going over the role of the risk manager, the insurance framework. We'll review questions at the end. The town has a pretty healthy insurance program. A lot of people think that that kind of relates just to claims management, but risk management, as we all know, and I think I actually have David's book on my bookshelf somewhere in my office, is about anticipating those losses before they happen. So the role of an effective risk manager is to review contracts and the use of risk transfer through those contracts. And I'm, as the town's risk manager and compliance manager, I'm involved in all these different work streams. The town has a risk committee that meets once a month. The risk manager manages all the insurance policies. That is responsible for developing townwide policies to reduce the frequency and severity of loss. The risk manager works with town council on legal matters and recommends settlement offers, and works with town departments to develop a response for risk on whether it's avoidance or prevention, mitigation, or transfer. We'll talk about a little bit about the insurance framework and the function of insurance, the insurance program in Concord, and then environmental liability. Very simply, insurance is a contract with an insurance company for reimbursement of loss sustained by the insured, typically for 1-year periods. Whereby the insurance company is liable for damages above the deductible and below or at their stated limit of liability, subject to the terms and conditions of the policy. The town's current policies include property coverage, general liability, cyber liability, auto. There's an umbrella policy that attaches to the general liability, property, and auto liability. We have a management liability policy, and then there's a few HR policies, including health insurance and workers' comp, that are managed by the HR department. And these policies are standard for municipalities, around $1 million of coverage per year. With the property insurance being our biggest line of coverage in terms of premium, in terms of losses, and in terms of valued protection. So at this site, what exactly are we insuring? We can't really insure a property that we don't own, either fully or partially. So the insurance would really only kick in once the town owns it. And so the insurance would attach to ownership, general liability, properties and assets, and environmental liability. So very simply, is this site insurable? Yes, there is. There's precedence for the town getting an environmental liability policy. The town purchased an environmental liability policy for the former W.R. Grace site, now known as the Bus Depot. It's located at 37 Knox Trail. So it's a similar but different parcel. The policy excluded exposure to nuclear metals and radiation. The insurer who we will talk to about the 2229 Main Street site was out of market and not a conventional insurer. The site at the at Knox Trail is only about 22 acres. And it is used every day during the school year for buses. They repair the school buses there, they park them. The bus drivers check in every day. They park their cars and then load up the buses. So in terms of unique exposures for this site, there's really two. There's title insurance. We will anticipate challenges to title once the town takes that over, and that'll be that will inform town council's approach and strategy for acquisition. There's series of complicated ownership stakes over the years. And so we'll want to make sure that that policy is tight and lines up tightly with the title research the town council does. And then the second is environmental liability. The policy typically environmental policies. So I'm sorry. So for environmental liability for this site, we won't be focused on the EPA's funding the site cleanup or the EPA's determining healthy limits of exposure. The policy would typically exclude civil or criminal penalties and fines. Sometimes policies will cover a settlement agreement. Oops, sorry. Pull it up. My apologies. Okay, let me pull this back up. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Great. In this case, we've talked before about the different roles the town could take in acquiring the site. One of those options is the town's designation as a bona fide prospective purchaser. This designation would protect the town from liability for cost recovery actions brought by the EPA or third parties once the town acquires a site. So to be clear, when we're talking about environmental liability, really what we're paying for is legal defense costs and possible settlements reached out of court that are not determined by a judge or
Can you
jury.
say more what that
So,
cost recovery action is?
so I'm sorry, can you say that again?
What is that, that last bullet, would protect the town from liability for cost recovery actions? What is that?
It's you know, any actions that derive from the remediation of the site by EPA.
Okay, so different than, I was thinking about the windfall thing, because EPA can ask for windfall profits if we make a profit on the site or something, right?
Yeah, Gary, that's an excellent point. This windfall concept is that concept is being challenged at the Supreme Court level, and I don't think there's actually any litigation on that right now, but we're aware this is a possibility, the windfall protection. And we know we've talked with town council about several Supreme Court cases that impact municipal power. And so that, I think that remains to be seen, but yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm just thinking of it in terms of a risk that we may want insurance to hedge against, like if we acquire the site and, you know, support somebody to develop housing and that housing becomes worth millions of dollars in the future, are we going to wind up with a bill to EPA or the Army or something?
Well, this is, you know, this is one of the tasks. I think it's the last task. It's the legal, to maintain the legal rights of the town.
Just wondering if there's an insurance angle that can eliminate that concern.
There might be. There's an interplay between how the acquisition is negotiated and how tight that is to protect us from future liability of all sorts. So I think there's an interplay, you know, what the town has and what protections the town has as part of the acquisition. Anything residual has to be covered by insurance, but I think the assumption, Gary, as you know, because we covered this, is that, you know, the liabilities protection will be pretty robust. The use of the site, I think that has to be negotiated. Use, reuse, resale of the site, windfall profits. I think that is going to be negotiated as part of the lien discussions with DOJ, frankly. I mean, because we know that they've tipped their hands early about, you know, there was an email way back that said, you know, we'll, and it's from EPA, from your predecessor, Kara, which said DOJ is willing to, you know, forget the liens, but wanted a certain percentage of profits from the site. That was some early conversation on that. It has no weight right now, but it spoke to the issue that DOJ and the government's going to keep an eye on what happens and what profits come out of the site. So, but anyway, that's part of the negotiation of the site acquisition. So there's certainly an interplay. But I look at the insurance coverage as sort of as an owner and operator to protect us, and especially what you didn't mention, Chris, with spills and releases of our own. You know, a truck delivering fuel oil at the site. You know, 10 years after acquisition. So, you know, our own spills have to be protected through that kind of pollution liability as well. That's not the legacy liability of EPA's contamination. So I'm sorry, not EPA's contamination, the responsible party's contamination. Sorry. David, then Pam.
Excludes possible civil or criminal penalties or other legal judgments. I'm having trouble imagining what those might be. Can you help me, Chris, with your experience to put some reality on those bones?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we fail to enforce some institutional controls and there was a lawsuit by a resident who alleged bodily harm and went to court and there was a judgment against the town and there was a final settlement, that judgment, that penalty would not be insured. You know, that the paying for the legal defense costs would, but the actual penalty itself would not.
Thank you. And would the requirement, the nulls and all the terminology that we would need to sign off on to maintain the institutional controls, what kind of legal requirement and or insurance protection, et cetera, is built into the transaction up front that might obviate that risk downstream?
Yeah, I that's a great question. I think that I think it's too early to answer that. It'll really come down to what the nulls look like, and then reviewing the protocols for that transfer of use restrictions once if the town does acquire the site.
Does that have a lot to do with our liability downstream? Okay, thank you.
It's a very specific, because you have to really look at what are the institutional controls, each one of them, and how the town, you know, some of them are easy, some of them more difficult. The easy ones, don't sink a well and use groundwater from the site. I think it's pretty easy. It's permitting, it's all sorts of issues. The more difficult ones is somebody, you know, running a truck into a remediation facility, because we're liable for wrecking if, you know, the remediation, or somebody digging 10 feet into the cap. Could that happen? I don't think so, but you know, who knows? Pam, then Carl.
So I was hoping that, Chris, that we could post your slides on the website.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And the Knox Trail, the idea of a gasoline spill at Knox Trail, that is covered by that liability insurance, right?
Yeah, there is like a general environmental coverage that the town has as part of its general liability policy. The environmental policy was much bigger in scope that we had. It was in place for 3 years, and it included a broader response. But yeah, a gasoline spill would be would be covered. Yeah.
And would be kind of the same sort of problem that you would have of an additional contamination at the site at the 2229 site is a moral equivalent there, so.
Yeah.
Additional that we caused.
Yeah.
Carl.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Chris, if the risk that I think about is a third party's violation of the institutional controls. You know, and that may create a loss or a lawsuit from some party. And, you know, I imagine, you know, you're looking for indemnification or other legal mechanisms that would make, you know, would shield you from that, but that might fail, you know, company might go bankrupt or for whatever reason that might not, you know, work. So, but is there a way to be insured against loss related to, you know, third party violation of the institutional controls?
Yeah, so the insurance, yes, and the environmental liability policy would cover legal defense costs to defend the town and basically the town's position that it had alerted the third party of the nulls and that the third party had violated or not complied with it. Now that the circumstances of that loss would really kind of vary and would drive a little bit of the coverage issues.
Yeah, I would add, I think any third party that uses or comes on the site would need to have their own coverage. We need to have to assure that. We're getting, you know, I asked Chris to kind of just say, you know, can we insure the site? The answer is yes. There are issues, there are details, they're intertwined with the acquisition and everything else, but I just, to be continued, we're not going to solve all the issues right here. Did I see Terry with her hand raised? What happened? Maybe she disappeared.
Well, I was.
Oh, there she is.
I was just going to ask, but you know, I agree with you though, maybe this is too detailed. But whether there would be a cap and whether the umbrella policy would cover things that aren't covered under the other policy. And you might not know that yet.
Yeah, we'll have to, you know, there's the insurer that provided the policy for Knox Trail. We'll talk to about providing a quote for 2229 Main Street, and there'll be limits. You know, I think that policy was pretty healthy, and I think it was around 5 million, but it really kind of remains to be seen, you know, what condition the site is in and you know, where we are with institutional controls.
Okay, Carl, is your hand still up or still have another question? Okay. Good, Chris, thank you. This is it's not a simple topic to cover in 10 minutes. Thank you for doing it. I think based on some of the questions here, before you post a slide deck, you may want to, you know, add to the slide deck to clarify some of those, just because it's going to be public out there and it'll invite questions. If you can, add a slide just to clarify. If not, that's fine. It's a public meeting, and I've assured the public we would post everything that's discussed here. So, and we will. Okay, final agenda item is to approval of the minutes. And I think I have those shared here. This is the minutes of July 11th that Rich put together. Hopefully you've all looked at those, or is there any comments, or has everybody had a chance to take a look at the minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions? Pam, do you have a question?
Yeah, I actually was at this meeting. I came late, so I'm not on the list, but I was attending on Zoom. So, Pam Rockwell.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll add you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I did
Gary.
have a couple of comments on the second page, I guess it is, with the list of suggestions, recommendations for the reuse work group. Number 5, I could be wrong, but it says it was suggested that use as a transport hub was opposed by the community at the time of the previous report. My sense was that at the time of the previous report, people were not advocating for the transport hub, but I didn't hear active opposition. So I'm wondering if we could reword that, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody did say at the meeting that it was actually actively opposed, but I didn't think that was the case.
I heard that, and I forget who said it, that people had opposed it. As a matter of fact, that triggered a discussion of we can't just look at what's good for Concord, we got to look at the region. But I forget who said it, but they quoted community concerns about increased traffic on 62.
I think there were concerns about increased traffic, but it was not due to the transportation hub. They were concerned that use of the site would increase traffic on 62 previously. So
Okay,
mean-
I was, I'll make that change. It's not a problem.
temper those that,
I was the one that made the comment about that the previous reuse committee didn't show that there wasn't support for a regional transportation hub that basically serviced people who were not in Concord at all.
totally
And-
agree, Pam.
And
but
so it took people off the road from 62 to the train station, or for 62 to.
Totally agree. I just think we need to be very careful about how this is phrased, because there were two different concepts that were discussed. Serving as a regional transportation hub, basically, the whole site would be a massive parking lot for people to come in, and then there would be bus fleets that would ship out from there, versus what we were actually proposing in many of the concepts, which was just one node on our local transportation link. Two different transportation
maybe-
hub concepts.
So maybe we say regional transportation hub.
I would just reword it to be vaguer, because it was a nuanced discussion that we had 3 years ago, and
Let me try a little weasel wording.
and then the second comment I had is at the very bottom of that page. To not signal any personal preferences for particular uses in presenting the data at public input meetings. Sounds kind of like we're trying to avoid, to David's point, we want to have a trusted conversation with the public. And so our goal really is to, not insert personal biases into reuse inquiries, not to not signal our personal preferences in presenting the data. It's really to try and be unbiased in presenting the data, even though we acknowledge everybody has some personal biases. So again, just the language, that's all.
Can you suggest a rewording, Gary?
I trust Rich to just, I don't know,
Okay,
try to be neutral or something.
let me find the weasel again.
Okay, but just to clarify the intent there so we can vote on the minutes subject to amendments that we just talked about. Or else we can.
Yeah,
If
just-
you,
No, I mean, I think the minutes are all great. I would just be a little bit more neutral about both of those statements, and we're good.
okay. Do I have a motion to?
Gary, I'll run my edits by you before I send it back to Paul.
Am I hearing that we should postpone the vote on the approval and look at the revised version, or are these amendments known and agreed upon by the task force? Do I have a motion to approve, and let's see what the vote is.
Well, I would move to approve with amendments based on the comments offered in this evening's discussion.
And I would second.
Okay,
Because one of the things I think committees can get into trouble with is fine tuning minutes so that they never get posted on a timely basis. And people who are following don't see anything. So
well, yeah, I agree. We've been pretty good about it. Rich has been
Yes,
great
we
about it. And
yeah.
I just want to make sure that these aren't material comments that would,
Right.
that's so,
Right, he's-
okay. So there's a motion on the table. All in favor of approving the minutes can show by hands. All opposed? Okay, it's unanimous and you're all on tape, so everybody knows who voted what. Is there any comments from Terry? Any additional comments? Anything from Kara or Kat or anybody else? Some people have left. Any other comments? Okay,
All right.
great meeting as usual. Thank you.